as the city grows and more people come in, we also have more and more challenges about how to share our roadway space, how to help people move on car, bus, bicycle, streetcar in the future, and so forth.
Yes.
How do you approach dealing with these limited spaces, and how do we share that space among people to help move everyone?
Well, I think that's happening because, as I mentioned at the outset of the interview, Ward 1 has the lowest per capita car ownership of any ward in the city, and I think it's getting even greater with the passage of time. And I think people are coming in and they're asking themselves with Zipcar and with other types of transportation, bus, and I was the route of the circulator from Woodley Park to McPherson Square was sketched out in my office when I was chairman of the Transportation Committee. And it was simple. We didn't do great studies or anything. We said, here are the areas where we should stop because people want to go there and they want to go somewhere else from there. And it was just common sense. It's one of the most successful lines that the circulator has. And it goes through Adams Morgan, Mount Pleasant, Columbia. It goes over to the retail center in Columbia Heights, goes down 14th Street to U Street, Logan Circle. This is it was a no-brainer. And I think that's the other element of this, is that we provide really good transportation. People say, well, gee, I can get on that circulator for $1, and it can take me from Adams Morgan, Woodley Park, right downtown in fairly short order, And that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And then, of course, the explosion of bicycle uses is perfectly wonderful. And there are problems that are coming with it in terms of public safety, but the gain is enormous in terms of use of bicycles. You've got to understand that I have to be somewhat sensitive to the fact that I represent a lot of people who still want a car and who can afford to have a car and have garages. That's a whole other issue, is why people aren't using their garages.
Sure.
If we get people to use their garages, that step alone
right.
would alleviate a lot of the parking pressures in Ward 1. But that's another issue. We tried to do that in Mount Pleasant. We've talked about a tax incentive to get people to use their garages to park their cars. We should do it.
With more people taking the buses,
yes,
they also do find that those buses get stuck in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
WMATA has been promoting plans, which I know they were working on when you were on the Metro Board, of priority corridors, and they announced last year that on 16th Street, the number of people moving by bus is greater than the number of people moving by car.
Yes.
Even with, obviously, a small minority of the vehicles being buses.
Mm-hmm.
Should we therefore put in a dedicated bus lane, even at rush hours, on 16th Street or elsewhere in Ward 1?
Well, I think we've had express bus. I was very much an advocate for the creation of the express bus on 16th Street and on Georgia Avenue. Both of those happened while I was involved. And it's good, but there's still terrific bus bunching on 16th Street. Now, the other day I noticed 3 buses, one right after the other. And then at the next bus stop, people, crowds of people waiting. Metro WMATA has always treated the buses like stepchildren, who are kind of assigned to the coal bin of Metro. And it's been a slow process pulling the bus transportation out of that second class status and into first class status. It's not there yet. But I think a dedicated lane, because I think rapid bus makes a lot of sense. And when we compare the costs of rapid bus to light rail, and we compare the problems of rapid bus, or the problems of light rail to the relative ease of rapid bus, I think it's a very strong case. The notion of light rail running down Harvard or light rail running down 18th Street in Adams Morgan, it's quite a profound change, and because people forget that streetcars break down. I think nobody remembers that they break down. Well, I rode streetcars in the 50s and the 60s, and they broke down. And when they broke down, there was such a such a terrific backlog of traffic and congestion as the car had to be pulled away. You know, and that's just going to happen in the nature of things. Look at the metro trains.
Sure.
So once people really understand the full, and then not to mention the fact that you've got the trolleys running down, taking up an awful lot of roadway space, and that's going to create other challenges. And so, of course, you know...
what do you mean they're taking up a lot of roadway space?
Well, because of the rails.
Uh-huh.
You know, now H Street was perfect. But may I make a commercial message? When I was chairman of the Transportation Committee, I found the first trolley line scheduled for Bowling Air Force Base,
right,
running from the Anacostia Metro. And I'll never get the credit I deserve for this. But, you know... Huh?
Gotten it from me.
Oh, good. I'm glad. But the fact of the matter is, it was tricky and challenging to say, well, we love Anacostia and everything, but it doesn't make sense. We don't want to serve federal employees at Bowling Air Force Base. And it was under my leadership that it was shifted to H. H was a perfect street for the first trolley. Okay. And it just screamed out, you know, here we are, we're the best candidate. But moving away from Anacostia was very difficult.
So
but we did it.
Are you saying that the tracks take up a lot of space on H Street?
No, because H Street is...
Sorry.
No, sorry, wait a minute.
Yeah.
H Street is very broad.
Okay.
You know, Harvard, on the other hand.
Right. Now, on H Street even, they haven't dedicated a lane to the streetcar. It is
excuse me,
still running in mixed traffic. It will be sharing lanes with the other cars.
Yes.
Some have suggested that maybe over time, H needs a redesign to give those streetcars and the X buses perhaps a priority lane or queue jumping opportunities and so forth.
Right. But see, I think if people, you know, and I was 12 years on the Metro Board, and I don't want to think too much about that experience right at the moment, but I became convinced that if we had really good rapid bus, people would be very happy to use it. Very happy to use it. And we wouldn't have the enormous costs of investment, capital investment that we have relating to trolleys. I mean, trolleys are kind of, in some ways, they're sentimental and they're kind of exciting and new, but rapid bus can deliver. And we know plenty of examples where it has delivered. So I agree with you that I think dedicated bus lanes, if for no other reason than to show, now we have a dedicated bus lane on 9th Street, but there are no buses.
Right, and it's not enforced.
Well, but there's no buses.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's the silliest thing. You know, I mean, if we put a dedicated bus lane on a street where there are buses and lots of them, then people really say, oh, my, here we go.
Right.
It would so change the psychology. And you know better than I do, the psychology of transportation is so critically important to the way people react to their choices.
So should we get DDOT to pilot one on 16th Street? Where
Yes.
thinks is a good place?
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
All right. Have you seen the DDOT draft plan, Move DC plan, which includes that as a bus lane? It has other bus lanes. It has bicycle lanes or cycle tracks and so forth. Do you think that plan is on the right track?
I do. And I think, again, those who are thinking about this should be commended because they picked the right street, a street with a lot of buses. And I think it'll be very exciting to see the reaction to it once it really functions, because we don't have a dedicated bus lane of any. 7th Street, you know, I'm just 9th. I've already commented on, so let's try it.
Right, Georgia Avenue, which
has express lanes. I think that Georgia should have an express bus lane too.
All right,
we've always been in favor of that.
Absolutely.
But you just don't get the attention from Metro WMATA on this issue. And I don't think it's changed since I've left the board.
I think that they will say that it's that DDOT has not been supportive in the past because DDOT has to sign off on those changes. That's what I hear from people I've talked to at WMATA.
What are those lights that are supposed to turn when you approch and all that? Any signal prioritization? Has any of that ever worked?
Back and forth between
has it ever worked?
Not well enough.
Count on Metro to do the routine fairly well, but anything out of the routine seems to overwhelm them very easily.
One more transportation question, then we can wrap up. Also, in addition to transit, as the numbers of people getting around increases, more and more people are walking and bicycling. The roads remain somewhat dangerous to a lot of people. definitely parts of Ward 1 have dangers to pedestrians and cyclists.
Yes.
What do you think we should do to protect pedestrians and cyclists on our roads, including in Ward 1?
That is a very complicated and difficult question because, it involves the discussion of should bicyclists be subject to traffic controls. Pedestrians are subject to traffic controls. Automobiles are subject to traffic controls. Today, I think it's fair to say that bicycles are not, in terms of the practice, whatever the theoretical might be. And so you have routinely bicyclists going through red lights. You have routinely going through stop signs. I know the state of Idaho is maybe the only state in the United States that permits a bicyclist to slow and not come to a full stop at a stop sign.
Yes. They do have that law.
They do have that law, but we looked at it, and and the moment you suggest, okay, bicycles have to comply with traffic controls, you're carried into a vortex of discussion, and so on the other hand, we don't have a motor vehicle division within MPD. That was scrapped some years ago, I think before I was a council member, because it was seen as not the highest priorities. So we don't have any. I mean, when was the last time anyone saw a motorist get a moving violation that wasn't involved in an accident?
Right.
I don't remember the last occasion I saw that. I've seen stop and frisk for seat belts and so on, but to be actually stopped and being ticketed for speeding or for going through a stop sign, I'm sure it happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I just don't see it very often. In fact, I don't remember the last time.
Some might say that perhaps what you said at the beginning of that answer and at the end, you kind of came around full circle but contradicted the beginning, which is
absolutely. Well, that's why it's so complicated.
You said that maybe bicyclists are subject to not subject to traffic controls and motorists are, but motorists don't get any tickets.
Right, and bicyclists won't either.
Right, but
and pedestrians. Right. Do you know the most upset person I have ever dealt with in terms of anything relating to infractions? The most upset person, and it's happened on various occasions, was somebody who got a jaywalking ticket.
Sure.
And you'd think that you'd think the sky had fallen on their head, because this is, and so you start talking about ticketing pedestrians or ticketing bicycles, and we don't really much ticket cars. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's pretty much across the board unenforced. Cars are enforced the most, bicycles not at all, pedestrians, jaywalking doesn't exist for all practical purposes. And we could make great arguments for enforcement in each and every one of those areas. That's why the conversation gets so complicated, because it would be easy to suggest, well, if a bicyclist goes through a stop sign or a red light, they should get a ticket. But where are the police resources going to come from, And we've been very fortunate. Now, on the other hand, what we can do is we can have dedicated bicycle lanes. I've been very supportive of that. We have our smart bikes. We are encouraging people to use bicycles. We're getting them off of I think we should be looking more and more at dedicated streets. I think we can dedicate streets to bicycles. If we can get them to, downtown on a dedicated street, that makes sense, and then there'll be less fear of injury. And we want to talk about the enforcement issue. I'm going to do a Ward 1 forum on bicycles.
Okay.
And that, the WABA. Yeah, WABA has some wonderful materials, which I've now reviewed, on public policy making on bicycles, and would carry us into these discussions. And I think it's going to be a very interesting session.
I saw an article this morning from a study, I think it may have been in New York, about how as the number of bicyclists increased, the amount of law following
legal compliance.
Well, legal compliance doesn't appear to be maybe the case for other modes of travel, but that was at least there was that change. So that's an interesting.
Say that again.
As there were more and more people bicycling,
right, there was greater compliance by bicyclists of
with
the
laws because there maybe created a certain amount of social pressure or feeling of non-vulnerability. What some people say. This isn't we'll put in the interview here because I'm not going to talk a lot, but just because you brought it up, that when you're the only bicyclist on the road, you sort of feel like you're sort of in a hostile environment, and so you don't rather than waiting at the stoplight when you go, then someone who's turning will hit you because they're not expecting you, so you should go ahead. Once there are 8 bicyclists there at that corner, now the person turning surely can't miss all 8, so they'll be more aware, and so therefore it creates more of a feeling of kind of legitimacy and therefore compliance with certain.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I will keep it in mind. But do you remember before we had this explosion of bicycle use? Do you remember how people used to talk about the bicycle couriers?
Yeah.
And the way they moved downtown, and anyone who evidenced their movements and how see, that's another area where everything has changed. You know, now that we don't hear anything more about the bicycle couriers,
right?
Although they're doing everything they used to do,
right? Because they're indistinguishable from all of the
because now there's what you said just reminds me of it, because there's so many bicycles
Sure.
on the street that they don't stick. That's right.
Right.
They're not as visible.